Have you ever seen a person who has everything, yet is starving to death? Not from a lack of food, but from a lack of love. Not from hunger of the stomach, but from hunger of the heart. This is the story of Eleanor Winthrop. She was the matriarch of the Winthrop family, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and prestige that spanned 3 generations. She lived in a marble palace that overlooked the entire city from its hilltop perch. The mansion had 47 rooms, a private cinema, an indoor pool, and a garden that rivaled the botanical gardens downtown. But to Eleanor, it was a gilded cage. A beautiful prison made of cold stone and lonelier memories. Her son, Richard, was a titan of industry. A billionaire who could buy anything money could offer. He owned companies on 3 continents, had a private jet, and a portfolio that made bankers weep with envy. But he had one problem he could not solve, one puzzle that no amount of money could unlock. His mother had not eaten a single proper meal in months. Her health was failing, her spirit was broken, and the doctors had run out of answers. They had tried everything from appetite stimulants to experimental treatments, but nothing worked. That was until a stranger came to the door on a stormy autumn evening. The Winthrop family mansion was a fortress of solitude, a monument to success that had become a tomb of silence. For years, Richard had filled it with the best of everything: private chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants, personal nurses trained at the finest hospitals, therapists who specialized in grief counseling. But none of it worked. None of it even came close. Every morning, Richard would have a beautifully prepared breakfast sent to his mother's room. Omelets with truffles and gold leaf, fresh squeezed pomegranate juice, delicate French pastries that melted on the tongue. Every evening, a 5-course meal would be delivered on silver platters. Lobster thermidor, filet mignon with red wine reduction, exotic fruits from distant islands, the most expensive delicacies from around the world. And every single tray came back full. Cold. Uneaten. Untouched. Like a cruel joke that the universe was playing on them. The untouched food would be scraped into the garbage, the silver platters polished and returned to the kitchen, only to repeat the same ritual the next day. Richard paced his office, his frustration boiling over as he stared at the latest untouched tray. He didn't understand it. She was being stubborn, he told himself. She was doing this to spite him. After everything he had given her, everything he had worked for, this was how she repaid him? With silence and refusal? The doctors said she was physically healthy, aside from the starvation and the muscle atrophy that came with it. They called it failure to thrive, a clinical term that sounded cold and distant. But Richard knew better, even if he refused to admit it out loud. His mother was heartbroken. She had lost her husband, his father, 5 years ago to a sudden heart attack. And she had never recovered. Not really. The grief had hollowed her out like a tree struck by lightning, leaving only the shell behind. Richard, however, was too busy building his empire to truly see her. He would visit her room for 5 minutes each morning, kiss her on the forehead like she was a child, and leave. He thought the money would solve the problem. He thought the chefs would save her. He thought that if he just threw enough resources at the problem, it would fix itself. He was wrong. Deeply, tragically wrong. Months passed. Eleanor became a ghost in her own home. She lost weight, her beautiful dresses hanging loose on her shrinking frame. Her eyes lost their sparkle, the light that had once made her the belle of every ball dimming to nothing. She stopped speaking altogether, retreating into a world of silence that no one could penetrate. She just stared out the window, watching the birds and the clouds, waiting for something or someone that would never come. Richard was desperate. He had tried everything, spent millions, called in favors from the most powerful people in the country. Nothing worked. He sat in his office, his head in his hands, and made a decision. He would find anyone at all, no matter how unorthodox. A nutritionist, a psychic, a witch doctor, a faith healer, he didn't care. If they could get his mother to eat, he would pay them $1 million. The reward was posted, the word went out, and a flood of applicants came to the door. Quacks and charlatans, genuine professionals and hopeful dreamers, all of them tried and all of them failed. A montage of interviews followed. Potential chefs brought their signature dishes, only to have them rejected. Doctors offered new medications, but Eleanor refused to swallow them. Therapists tried to reach her, but she remained silent and distant. They all shook their heads, collected their consultation fees, and left, defeated. Then, on a rainy evening, the doorbell rang through the cavernous mansion. A figure in a worn-out coat stood in the rain, water dripping from the brim of her hat. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s, humble, and was carrying a small, worn recipe book that seemed to have been passed down through generations. No fancy suit, no briefcase, no impressive credentials. just a girl and her grandmother's recipes. Her name was Sarah. She was 24 years old, a recent culinary school graduate who had scraped together enough money to attend by working double shifts at a diner. She didn't have any celebrity chef credentials. She didn't have a team of scientists or nutritionists behind her. She was just a girl with a recipe book and a heart full of empathy. Richard was furious when he saw her. He scoffed openly, his frustration boiling over. She had not eaten for a world-renowned chef from Paris, and she thought she could get her to eat? Why should he trust her? What made her so special? Sarah remained calm, confident, and unshaken by his anger. She met his gaze steadily and spoke with a quiet certainty. She could not promise him that Eleanor would eat her food. But she could promise this: she would not try to sell her fancy food she did not want. She would not try to impress her with expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. She wanted to listen to her. She wanted to understand her. She wanted to feed her soul, not just her stomach. Richard was skeptical, deeply and profoundly skeptical. But he was out of options. Every other avenue had been explored and exhausted. He gave Sarah a chance, but with a stern warning. She had one meal. One single meal. If Eleanor did not eat, she was out. Do not waste his time. Sarah walked into the kitchen, and it took her breath away. It was massive, sleek, and full of state-of-the-art equipment that would make any professional chef weep with joy. There were induction cooktops, convection ovens, immersion circulators, and enough copper pans to outfit a small restaurant. She looked around, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and then walked over to the pantry. She bypassed the truffles, the caviar, the foie gras, and the truffle oil. She walked past the exotic spices and the imported cheeses. She did not look for the fancy stuff. She looked for the simple things. Potatoes, the humble and reliable staple. Onions, the backbone of so many meals. Fresh herbs from the garden. A simple cut of chicken, nothing fancy, just honest food. The head chef, a man with 3 Michelin stars and an ego to match, scoffed at her. What was she making? That was peasant food. She was a Winthrop. She expected caviar and gold leaf. She expected the finest that money could buy. Sarah replied quietly that right now, Eleanor did not expect anything. That was the problem. She had been given the best of everything, and it had only made her worse. Perhaps what she needed was something familiar. Something that reminded her of who she used to be. Sarah worked in the kitchen, her movements deliberate and focused. She was not just cooking. She was pouring her heart into every motion, every chop, every stir. She was humming an old, World War II-era tune under her breath, a song her grandmother used to sing. She was making a simple, rustic chicken soup with dumplings, the kind of meal that had sustained families through hard times and wars. While she cooked, Sarah did not talk about the recipe or the ingredients. Instead, she asked the kitchen staff about Eleanor. Why was she so sad? What did she used to love? What made her laugh before the grief took over? They told her a story Richard had never bothered to share, a story that had been buried under years of wealth and success. Eleanor was not always a millionaire. She was a war bride, a young woman who had fallen in love with a soldier during the dark days of the war. When she married Richard's father, they were poor, desperately poor. He was a soldier returning from the war with nothing but his uniform and a heart full of hope. They lived in a tiny apartment with a leaky roof and a shared bathroom down the hall. The only thing they could afford was simple food, the kind of food that stretched $1 and filled a belly. But there was one meal they loved above all others. A simple chicken soup with dumplings, her grandmother's recipe, passed down through the generations. It was the first meal they shared as a married couple, sitting at a rickety table in their cramped kitchen. It was the meal they had on the night they found out they were having a baby, celebrating with tears of joy and a shared bowl of soup. It was the taste of their love story, the flavor of their journey together. Every time they ate it, they were transported back to the beginning, to a time when they had nothing but each other. Richard never knew this. He just bought her expensive things, thinking that luxury would fill the void. He never asked about the simple things. He never asked about the soup. Sarah carried the tray up the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. The tray held a simple bowl of soup, a slice of crusty bread, and a small glass of water. She looked different from the other chefs. She looked nervous, vulnerable, human. Sarah knocked softly on the door and waited. There was no answer, so she pushed it open gently and entered the dark room. Eleanor was sitting by the window as usual. She was frail, so thin that her bones were visible through her skin. Her hair, once a beautiful silver, was dull and unwashed. She looked like she had not seen the sun in months, her skin pale and translucent. She stared out at the rain-streaked glass, her eyes hollow and empty. Sarah did not smile brightly. She did not try to cheer her up with false optimism or empty platitudes. She just sat the tray down on the table next to her and pulled up a chair, sitting opposite her. She was not there to perform or to impress. She was there to listen. She told Eleanor that she knew she had not been eating, and she knew she did not want to talk about it. So she would not pressure her. She would not beg or plead. Instead, she asked if she could tell her a story. It was not a very good one, she admitted, but it was one her grandmother used to tell her. Her grandmother was a cook, but not in fancy places. She worked in army camps during the war, feeding soldiers who were far from home and hungry for something familiar. She used to say that the bravest men do not need the fanciest food. They need the most familiar food, something that reminds them of home, of their mothers, of the life they left behind. She used to make a soup. Chicken soup with dumplings. The same soup that Sarah had just made. Eleanor's head slowly turned. Her eyes, lifeless and dull, flickered with the faintest glimmer of recognition at the mention of the soup. It was the first time she had reacted to anything in weeks. Sarah continued. One night, a soldier came to the camp. He was a captain, a man who had seen horrors that would break a lesser soul. He looked strong, but his hands were shaking. He did not want the soup. He said he was not hungry. He said he could not eat. But her grandmother knew better. She told the captain she was not serving him soup. She was serving him a memory. She put the bowl in front of him, and he ate. He ate and he wept, because the soup tasted like home. It tasted like his mother's kitchen, like his childhood, like everything he was fighting to protect. Sarah gently slid the bowl of soup in front of Eleanor. The steam rose in a fragrant cloud. The aroma filled the room, warm and comforting. It was the scent of onions and thyme, of chicken and home, of a time before grief and loss. She told Eleanor that it was just a memory, that's all this was. A taste of the past, a reminder of a love that never really died. Eleanor's hand trembled as she slowly reached out and picked up the spoon. It was the first movement she had made in days. She dipped it into the broth, her movements hesitant and uncertain. Richard was watching through the crack in the door, his breath held, his heart pounding. He had seen this before. She would pick up the spoon, look at the food, and put it down. That is all she ever did. That was the ritual of her refusal. But this time, something was different. There was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability that had been absent for months. Eleanor brought the spoon to her lips. She took a tiny sip, barely a taste. Her eyes widened, and she looked at Sarah with an expression of confusion and wonder, as if she was seeing a ghost. She took another sip, this one longer. Then she took a bite of the dumpling. She chewed it slowly, savoring it. She was not just eating. She was remembering. She was transported back to a tiny apartment with a leaky roof, to a table that wobbled, to a man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She was remembering the steam rising from the pot, the laughter that filled the room, the warmth of a love that needed nothing but itself. She was remembering the first meal they shared, the night they celebrated their pregnancy, the thousands of quiet dinners that made up a lifetime of happiness. She was remembering who she was before the money, before the grief, before the loneliness. The first tear fell from her eye and dropped into the bowl, a tiny ripple in the broth. Eleanor started to sob, a deep, wrenching sob that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. But she was also smiling, a fragile, tentative smile that had not graced her lips in years. She ate the whole bowl, every last drop, until there was nothing left but the memory of its warmth. Richard burst through the door, overwhelmed by emotion. He rushed to his mother's side, taking her hands in his. Eleanor looked up at him, and for the first time in months, she did not see a businessman or a stranger. She saw her son, the little boy she had raised, the child she had rocked to sleep. She asked Richard how Sarah had known. How had the stranger known about the soup? Richard looked at Sarah, standing humbly in the corner of the room. He was humbled, truly humbled for the first time in his life. He was speechless, his arrogance stripped away. He did not ask about the $1 million. He asked something far more important. How did she do that? The doctors could not. The therapists could not. The Michelin-starred chefs could not. What did she have that they did not? Sarah explained simply that he had fed Eleanor's body with the best of everything. The chefs had fed her palate with exquisite flavors and textures. But she needed someone to feed her soul. Food is not just fuel, Sarah said. It is history. It is love. It is a story passed down through generations. His mother was not sick, not really. She was lonely. She was grieving. She was hungry for something that money could never buy. Over time, the mansion began to change. The heavy curtains were drawn open, letting in the sunlight. Eleanor sat in the garden, wrapped in a warm shawl, watching the flowers bloom. Sarah was with her, cooking outdoors on a portable stove, the two of them talking and laughing. Richard was there too, more often than he had been in years, his business calls cut short, his meetings cancelled. It was not just the soup. Sarah stayed, becoming a fixture in the household. She was not just a cook anymore. She was a friend, a confidant, a bridge back to the world. She made Eleanor's favorite memory meals, recreating the dishes from her past. She taught Richard how to cook his father's favorite pancake recipe, the one his father had made on Sunday mornings. She brought life back into the house, laughter and warmth where there had been silence and cold. Richard helped Sarah in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, his movements clumsy and messy, but filled with joy. He told her he never realized he had been so busy trying to make money that he forgot the only thing his mother needed was a taste of the past. Sarah did not ask for the $1 million. She never even mentioned it. She asked for a job, not a high-profile one, just the humble position of being the family cook. She asked for the chance to continue feeding their souls. Because she knew the truth that Richard had taken so long to learn. The richest man in the city could not buy his mother a single meal, not one that truly nourished her. But a simple girl from a culinary school, armed with her grandmother's recipes and an empathetic heart, gave her a lifetime of memories, one spoonful at a time. The final image is of a beautiful dinner table set with simple, honest food. Eleanor sits upright, healthy and strong, her cheeks flushed with color. She is smiling, genuinely smiling, as she reaches for the bread basket. Richard is there, his arm around his mother, his face relaxed and happy. Sarah is there, sitting among them as part of the family. The table is filled with laughter and conversation, the clink of glasses and the warmth of connection. Eleanor looks at Sarah and raises her glass of water, toasting the cook who did not just feed her, but fed her heart. She thanks her for giving her back her life, her memories, her son. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Sometimes, we think we need the best of everything to be happy. We chase money and status, believing they will fill the emptiness inside us. But true happiness does not come in a golden platter or a fancy package. It comes in a warm bowl of soup that tastes like home. It comes in the simple act of being seen, of being remembered, of being loved. And that is something no amount of money can ever buy.